Well, the government has a few other things in the in-tray at the moment, including recycling, a pledge to massively ramp up recycling in the country, in part because of those China import bans set to start taking effect from the middle of this year. Also, though, at the same time, we're seeing plants shut down, the latest one in Sydney, because of that import ban that is set to bite. Joining me now is Liberal MP Trevor Evans, and the Assistant Minister in this area from our Brisbane studio. Thanks very much for your time. So you've got this big ramping up plan on recycling, but one of Sydney's largest plants has just closed. Could others go the same way?
Well, look, Tom, you're absolutely right. We have seen this very big plant in New South Wales suspend its operations. The business itself is still trading, and what it follows is a much worse story last year of an entire recycling business, SKM, closing its doors and collapsing, impacting mostly councils in Victoria. But both of these stories really reinforce the reason that the federal government is getting involved. There are some very big challenges across the board in our recycling and waste management industries here in Australia. We can't overstate that, of course. By world standards, Australia does pretty well in terms of our recycling and recovery rates. But there is a big opportunity here which the Prime Minister has seen, which is really to bring a level of national leadership and coordination of the states and lots of the other players in this space to try to make sure that our industry locally is more sustainable and strong.
What about, I know it's not always in a politician's interest to criticise the voters, but what about education in terms of recycling? You see a lot of soft plastic where it shouldn't be, caps on bottles, but it gets worse. I mean, in the big sort of joint unit ones, I've seen coat hangers in there, I've seen suitcases. Do people just not give a stuff anymore?
Look, there's a couple of aspects to that education, awareness and motivation piece, and they are just some of the factors here. I mean, going back to where the industry is at the moment, there's some big work to be done on the demand side to make sure all of us as consumers, as well as industry and business, as well as governments, remember to buy more materials that are made out of recycled content. We've got a lot of work to do as a government to co-invest with industry in the sorts of infrastructure and the facilities that we need to see around Australia so that we can do more on shore. And you're absolutely right. Everybody's got a role to play here, and everybody, I suppose, can do a little bit better. There's an education and awareness piece certainly that needs to be done. Some of the products that are out on the shelves these days, new compostable and biodegradable options are out there, but it means that it's a much tougher choice for lots of us when we are at the bin face making that split-second decision about which bin things need to go into. But there's also more broadly a motivation piece, which... Sorry, go on, Tom.
Yeah, so motivation. No, go on.
Well, I was just going to say there's a motivation piece here as well, which is of great interest to the government. We want to make sure that people have more confidence in the fact that when they do put something in the right bin, such as their recycling bin, it actually gets recycled and turned into other products.
That confidence might have been lost a bit with recent reports of all this stuff being taken off to landfill.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are some parts of Australia, some of the places around Melbourne, indeed west of Brisbane here in Ipswich, where residents have been absolutely appalled to hear that they've been very carefully making those decisions about putting things in their recycling bin, only to find out that it's been dumped into landfill right alongside their general rubbish. These are the sorts of stories that suggest to us as a federal government that we can step in, we can play a national leadership role, and we can hopefully coordinate the different approaches that are taken in different jurisdictions and different council areas around Australia to really start to move the dial.
Just finally, at the moment in the most places, if you want to recycle your soft plastic, which is a lot of them actually in terms of the packaging, you've got to go to a supermarket and hope that they are ones that have their own schemes. Is the government going to step up? Obviously this has to be with councils involved, but would you hope that this could be something that soft plastics has its own recycling for most household Australians without having to go to a supermarket?
Absolutely, Tom. And when I said that Australia does pretty well by world standards on recycling and recovery rates, one of the things that lets us down is that we've been relying far too much on overseas and offshore options for what we do with our plastics recycling. We've seen some of those terrible stories over recent years about how Australians' plastics have been sent overseas, ostensibly to go into world recycling and supply chains, but far too much of it has been lost or mismanaged along the way, meaning that it has ended up back in our rivers and our oceans. So the federal government has very strong views about this. We want to build a very strong and viable onshore recycling industry that has some of these sorts of facilities around hard plastics, around soft plastics, around remanufacturing, around palletizing, all of those things. And what we've done is put some very significant funding on the table up front, and we've also flagged a strong willingness to work with the other levels of government and industry to co-invest and turbocharge the building of these facilities. We've not got that much time because the bans that we want to introduce on exporting Australia's rubbish offshore will start in July.
We'll check in on those soon. So it is an ambitious target, and we'll perhaps talk down the road when there are some more things fleshed out. Wanted to get to another couple of points quickly. Labor, we have confirmed here at Sky News is going to adopt a 2050 net zero emissions target. Should this be bipartisan?
Well, I think that there is a lot of scope for bipartisanship right across the board, and that especially includes topics around the environment. It includes the waste and recycling work that we were talking about just then. Added includes that big subject around climate change. Can I say, though, for the benefit of your viewers, my experience in the Parliament to date, I've been in the Parliament now for 3.5 years. I was on the House of Reps Standing Committee on the Environment for most of the last term of office. All of the work in Canberra is not really about fundamental first questions around whether climate change is real or what the scientific response should be. All of the work that we've been focused on in Canberra in those years has been predominantly focused on what are we actually doing about it? What can Australia do? What can our contribution look like? What are the most effective and the efficient options we can take?
I just want to ask you in a very straightforward sense. Labor is now saying 2050 net zero emissions. Should the coalition follow suit?
Well, I guess there's a lot of policy work to be done on this front. As a government, we have always tried to ensure that targets that Australia signs up to are targets that can be met and where you can show a path to meeting them. On that basis, the targets that we've signed up to, such as Kyoto 2 ending in July this year, and indeed the Paris targets for 2030, there are clear paths for us to achieve those targets. I want to make sure that
open on that figure, bipartisanship would be a good result here rather than attacking Labor?
Look, many of us in the government and in the party room would love to envisage a world where there's a net zero carbon outcome. I guess the point that I'm making is when we commit to that, I want to be able to look Australians square in the eye and say, and we have the path with some confidence to achieve it.
All right. Fair enough. Just finally, this awful domestic violence, what looks to be a murder in Brisbane, a mother and 3 young children under the age of 10 are very close to your electorate. This has drawn some questions about the inquiry into family law that is going to go ahead with Pauline Hanson as Deputy Chair. She's arguing fathers are getting a raw deal. Is that the right emphasis right now?
Well, look, I wouldn't be so quick to draw links between the news today and any inquiry that the Senate's holding at any time. What I would say very, very quickly is to register how horrified and appalled I and so many people in our community are. I think the thing that really gets to us is that this happened in a quiet, leafy suburb in southern Brisbane, and it's something that brings home how this could happen in any of our communities and could be happening behind closed doors in streets, in our own neighbourhoods. On the broader question of reform of the family law system, can I say I understand there's lots of cases out there, there's lots of perceived sides. The Senate inquiry will do what the Senate inquiry is going to do. That's a slightly different question to what the government is already doing on this front. We are very, very keen to ensure that we can reform the family law system to make it more streamlined so that you're taking a lot of the litigation and the lawyers away from the system, firstly. And secondly, we're very interested in exploring how you can separate questions around assets and financial separation to what should be our real priority here, and that's the welfare of the children. I'm very interested, and the government is very interested on seeing how we can take the interests of the children, put them up front, maybe with appropriate expert advice from clinical or child psychologists and so on, and get those decisions made first. That's the biggest priority, and I think that's the right priority.
Right out of time, but Trevor Evans, appreciate your time today. Thank you.